Last week, my younger sister stood on my porch with a rolling suitcase and said, "I am moving in." Her voice was calm, almost bored, like she was telling me the weather. But the moment she said it, my mind dropped straight back to the night everything fell apart. The Christmas night in 2010 when she destroyed my life and convinced our whole entire family to cut me off. Before I take you back there, let me ask you something. What are you doing while listening to my story right now? For me, on the night all this happened, I was driving home from a late bakery shift, with the smell of sugar and cinnamon still stuck to my clothes, having no idea that before the evening ended, I would lose everyone I thought I belonged to. I remember turning onto my grandmother's street in Salem, Oregon, just as a light snow began to drift across the windshield, the kind of soft snow that makes porch lights glow like lanterns. Inside, I could see silhouettes moving around the living room. My family, my mom and dad, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and of course my younger sister Sienna, already holding the spotlight as usual. I was 22 that year. She was 19. She had always been the one people rushed to comfort. I had always been the one they relied on to keep things together. I stepped inside with a small paper bag in my arms, the one holding the gift I stayed up half the night making. It was a handmade memory book from my grandmother, full of recipes she had taught me when I was little. I thought she might cry happy tears. I thought maybe, for once, I would do something that everyone would appreciate. But the second I walked in, the air felt wrong. Not tense enough to be obvious, but tight, like a room that had been waiting to exhale. Sienna spotted me first. She flashed me a smile that never reached her eyes. "You made it, Harper. We were starting to think you forgot us." Her voice is silky, sweet, and cutting at the same time. My mom turned toward me, her face tired, as if my presence added weight instead of relief. My dad gave me a nod so small it could have been a twitch. I tried to brush it off. I helped set plates, carried dishes, filled glasses, and did the things I had always done. My hands worked from habit. My mind tried to ignore the way Sienna kept whispering to our mom, both of them glancing toward me like something had already been decided before. I walked through the door. When it was time for gifts, everyone gathered in a loose circle around the living room. The tree lights blinked in slow, warm colors. My grandmother smiled at each person with the kind of tired love you only see in people who have lived many winters. I waited until the end to hand her my gift. She touched the wrapping gently, tracing the ribbon with a soft smile. That was the moment Sienna struck. A sharp cry sliced through the room. Sienna stood up so fast her chair scraped the hardwood floor. She held her hands against her chest like she had been physically wounded. "Something is missing," she gasped, her breath broken. "Grandma's envelope, the one with her medical money. It was right here. It was right here an hour ago." The room erupted into noise. My mom jumped up. My dad stiffened. My aunts began to murmur. I felt heat rise in my face even before anyone looked at me. It was like watching a slow inevitability take shape. Sienna sucked in a shaky breath, pointed toward the table near me, then toward herself, then finally toward me again in a trembling arc. I saw her eyes glisten. Perfectly timed tears. Harper was near the table earlier. I did not want to say anything. I tried to trust her, but the envelope is gone. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. It felt like the world tilted under my feet. The room stilled into a frightening silence. My mom stepped toward me with a look that drained the warmth out of my chest. "You always bring chaos into this family. Always." Her voice cracked like a whip. Dad did not speak. He just looked at me with disappointment so heavy it pinned me in place. Aunts shook their heads. Someone whispered. I knew something like this would happen. I tried to speak. I swear I did not touch anything, but my voice sounded small compared to Sienna sobbing into our mom's shoulder, compared to the collective judgment pressing on me from every direction. In the corner of my eye, I caught Cousin Dana staring at the gift table. Her face was pale, conflicted. She had seen something earlier. I knew it. I could see the truth shaking behind her hesitation. But she looked down and clasped her hands. She would not speak. My grandmother held her hand to her chest, hurt flickering across her features. That look shattered something inside me, more than any accusation. I felt the moment the family made up their mind. It happened in a breath, a shift, a silent verdict. "Get out," my mom said. Not yelling this time, just cold. "Leave this house right now." Snow hit my face as soon as the door opened. Real snow, and the kind that lives inside your chest. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the muffled voices behind the door. No one followed me. Not my mom. Not my dad. Certainly not Sienna, who I could picture collapsing into comfort, the kind people reserve for those who play helpless well. I walked down the driveway with nothing but my coat, my keys, and the sound of my heartbeat thudding in my ears. My phone buzzed once. A text from Dana. "I am sorry." That was all she wrote. Sorry for not speaking up. Sorry for letting a lie swallow me whole. Sorry for letting a girl with a trembling voice and a perfect performance win. Again. I sat in my car with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. Snowflakes tapped the glass in soft, fragile patterns. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that comes right after something breaks. I lost my family in one night. Every branch of it. Every person who should have stood beside me. And I did not know then that the silence that followed would stretch for 13 long years. But I also did not know that one day I would build something of my own. A life strong enough to stand on. Strong enough that when that same sister showed up at my door, suitcase in hand, expecting to walk right back into my world, I would finally be ready. Thank you for listening to this first part of my story. Before we move on, tell me something. What are you doing right now while listening? I love knowing the little details of where people are when they hear moments like this. It reminds me that even the hardest memories can connect us in unexpected ways. And with that night sealed behind me, this is where the real story begins. I walked away from that night with the kind of cold that does not leave your bones easily. It stayed with me on the drive north, stayed with me while I counted the few bills I had left, stay with me as I crossed into Portland just before sunrise. I had $300 to my name, a duffel bag with 2 pairs of jeans, and a stubbornness that felt like the only thing keeping me upright. I told myself one sentence over and over. I am starting over. On my own. I rented the cheapest room I could find in an old boarding house near Southeast Powell. The walls were thin, and the hallways always smelled like reheated noodles. But the landlord did not ask questions, and I had paid for 1 week in advance. I took whatever jobs I could get. Daytime dishwashing at a diner where the manager called everyone honey, but made us clock out if business slowed down. Evening room cleaning at a small motel off the highway where I learned to move fast and keep to myself. And the night shift in a bakery that only came alive after 8. By 2 in the morning, I would be elbow deep in dough, folding and kneading until my arms shook. There were nights I slept 3 hours, nights I did not sleep at all. But none of it broke me, because the alternative was being the girl who walked, away from her grandmother's porch, ashamed and alone. I refused to let that be the end of my story. Still, the isolation had its own sting. I learned quickly that silence carries memories, whether you want it to or not. The first month in Portland, I found myself replaying scenes from my childhood in pieces, not the happy ones, the ones that suddenly made sense now that the truth had blown everything open. I remembered the time my dad's watch went missing, and without hesitation, everyone turned to me. I was 10 years old and terrified of doing anything wrong. Yet somehow it was my fault until he found it in his own jacket pocket. I remembered the day Sienna forgot her science project and burst into tears in front of our mom. Somehow, the blame drifted toward me for not reminding her. I remembered holidays where Sienna would pout if she was not the center of attention, and every adult in the room would trip over themselves to soothe her while I swept floors or carried dishes. I saw the pattern with new eyes. I had been the family's scapegoat for so long that I did not notice the weight until it crushed me in one night. And once you see something clearly, you cannot unsee it. I spent most evenings too tired to think. But one night, after my motel shift, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, scrolling through my old phone. Notifications popped up in a flood. My family had not contacted me directly, but they were talking. Loudly. There it was, a post in the extended family Facebook group. I was not in the group anymore. Someone had sent me screenshots. Sienna had written a long, dramatic story about how she discovered I had stolen Grandma's medical money, then ran off without a word. She wrote that she had tried to forgive me, but that I had chosen a selfish path far away from everyone who cared about me. She ended with a line that made my stomach twist. Please keep my sister in your prayers as she finds her way back to honesty. Find my way back. As though I had wandered off like a child lost in a grocery store, as though she had not fabricated the entire thing. By the next morning, the post had dozens of comments. Cousins sharing their disappointment, aunts writing that they always sensed something was off with me, an uncle posting a long message about family values and respect, people I had not seen in years, people who did not know me. They all believed her because believing her was easy. Because believing her kept the old narrative alive. Sienna is fragile and injured. I am chaotic and selfish. It was the same story we had been acting out since we were kids. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Dana. I think she lied. I am sorry. I should have said something. I stared at her words for a long time. Apologies like that can feel both heavy and hollow. She was the one person who could have stopped what happened that night. A single sentence would have saved me. But fear can be louder than conscience. I told her I appreciated the message and left it at that. There was no point asking for more. The longer I lived away from them, the more their silence took shape. My mom did not call. Not once. My dad did not send a message or leave a voicemail. I tried calling home a few times in those first weeks. Not because I thought they would apologize, but because part of me still believed families did not just abandon their own. Each call rang 6 times, then dropped. On the 7th attempt, a recorded voice informed me that the number had been changed. That one hit me like a physical blow. Not because losing contact surprised me, but because of how final it felt. My mom had changed her number without telling me. She had closed the door and locked it. I walked the city for hours that night, past bridges glowing orange over the river, past late-night bars spilling light onto the sidewalk, past strangers whose lives would never intersect with mine. I thought about driving back to Salem, knocking on the door, forcing them to hear me. But every scenario I imagined ended the same way, with me standing there alone while they closed ranks around Sienna. I realized I had a choice. I could keep trying to push myself into a family that did not want me, or I could build a life that had nothing to do with them. I chose the second. From that moment on, I stopped checking the family posts. I stopped waiting for an apology. I stopped expecting my dad to defend me, or my mom to wake up one morning and realize she had alienated the wrong daughter. Instead, I made myself a promise. I would not go back until I had a life so solid, so stable, so entirely my own that no one could take it from me again. Not my sister, not my mom, not anyone. I said those words out loud in my small, drafty room, and they felt like the first honest foundation I had ever laid. Outside, the city lights flickered on as a new storm rolled in. Snowflakes drifted past the window in slow spirals, almost like a reminder of the night everything fell apart. But the feeling inside me was different now. Not broken, not lost, just beginning. I told myself I was just beginning, and for a while, those words had to be enough. In early 2012, I picked up an old flyer from the community board at the diner where I washed dishes. Someone had posted an ad for shared access to a small industrial kitchen on the east side of Portland. It was available from 10 at night until 3 in the morning, a time slot no one else wanted. Because the heat shut off after 9, the lights flickered, and the neighborhood emptied out to nothing but the sound of passing trucks. Rent was low, and the owner only cared that you cleaned up after yourself. That was all I needed. The first night, I walked in with 2 grocery bags of ingredients and notebook of recipes. The kitchen felt both eerie and comforting. The stainless steel counters were cold enough to sting when my hands brushed them. The mixer looked older than me. The ovens groaned every time the temperature shifted. But the silence had a rhythm I understood. For the first time since leaving Salem, I felt like I had a place that belonged only to me. My schedule during those years was strange, even by my own standards. I would finish the dish shift at 7 in the evening, grab a cup of cheap coffee at a gas station, take an hour nap if my eyes refused to stay open. Then I would head into the kitchen and bake until my arms ached. Cinnamon rolls were the first things I made. Then chocolate chip bars and lemon cookies. Nothing fancy, just honest food, meant to bring comfort to people who needed it. At first, my customers were coworkers who wanted something sweet for their kids or for the office. Then friends of coworkers. Then small orders from people who heard I baked through the night. Every time I thought about slowing down, I remembered standing in the cold outside my grandmother's house with nothing but a coat and a broken heart. That memory pushed me harder than caffeine ever could. One night in late spring, a young woman slipped into the kitchen while I was boxing pastries. She held a small resume in her hands and looked nervous enough to faint. She said her name was Zoe, that she was 22, and that she had heard I might need help. I did not remember telling anyone that, but news travels in strange ways. I studied her for a moment. She was thin and pale from working at a convenience store down the street, but her eyes were steady when she said she could work hard and learn fast. Something inside me recognized the look. It was the same one I had worn for months. I told her she could start the next night. Having Zoe changed everything. She worked with a quiet intensity, like she was grateful for every minute she spent in the kitchen. She labeled boxes, mixed dough, cleaned trays, and asked questions that showed she cared about getting things right. She never pried into my past. She never asked why I baked at hours when most people slept. She simply showed up and did the work. Little by little, I stopped feeling like I was doing this alone. Orders increased too. One evening, I received an email from a regional coffee chain called Northwest Brew Company. They were looking for a local baker to supply a few stores with dessert bars for a trial. When I saw their name on the screen, my breath caught. It felt too big, too sudden, too much for someone who had been scraping by on motel rooms and night shifts. But after years of swallowing doubt, something in me finally whispered, "Try." The first order was scheduled for Thursday night, 50 boxes of assorted bars and rolls. It was more than I had ever produced at once. Zoe and I planned it down to the minute. We measured ingredients in advance, prepped trays, and arranged cooling racks in every corner of the room. By 10:30, the kitchen was warm and full of the smell of sugar and vanilla. Everything felt steady until the oven made a sharp metallic crack. I froze. The temperature light flickered and dropped. Then came another crack, like metal bending. My heart slammed in my chest. If that oven died, I would fail this order. Fail the one chance that had felt like the beginning of something real. I tried adjusting the dial. Nothing. I tried checking the pilot light. Nothing. Zoe rushed over, her brow furrowed with worry, but her voice stayed level. "Let me try something." She grabbed a heavy towel and opened the oven door, waving the hot air away before reaching inside to adjust the internal rack that had slipped off its track. The oven hissed, whined, then blinked back to life with a weak but stable glow. I let out a breath so shaky I almost laughed. We worked nonstop until almost 3:30 in the morning, packing warm bars into boxes, sealing labels, wiping edges clean. My back hurt, my feet throbbed, and my hands were covered in flour. But I felt good. Better than good. I felt capable. When we loaded the last box into my car, the sky was beginning to lighten. The delivery had to be at a Northwest Brew Company warehouse by 5 in the morning. I drove across town while Zoe slept curled against the passenger window. The roads were empty except for a few early commuters. When I reached the warehouse, a man with a clipboard stepped out of the side door. He inspected the boxes with a critical expression, then nodded once. He signed the form and said the simplest words, but they meant more to me than, "He knew. Looks good. We will try these today." I drove home just as Portland woke up. Cars filled the streets. People walked dogs or carried cups of coffee. The world felt normal in a way my life had not felt for a long time. I slept through most of the day, exhausted, but proud. I expected to wait days before hearing anything from Northwest Brew Company. Instead, around 9 that night, while I was measuring flour for another batch, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. A deep voice introduced himself as Mr. Hallbrook, one of the regional managers. He said the dessert sold out in less than 2 hours. Customers asked if they would be a regular item. Then he asked if I was interested in a long-term arrangement. For a moment, I could not speak. My throat felt tight. I managed to say that I was honored and that I would be ready for whatever volume they needed. He chuckled and said, "We like your confidence. Expect an email soon." Then he hung up. I stood there, holding the phone against my chest. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerators. A soft drizzle pattered against the window. I looked out at the dark parking lot lit by one flickering street lamp and felt something shift inside me. If I kept moving forward, they would never touch me again. That thought rose in me with a clarity that almost scared me. It was not anger, not bitterness, just certainty. I had spent so many years shrinking under the weight of my family's expectations that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand tall. Now, the world felt wide and possible. Z walked in, wiping her hands on her apron, and asked if I was all right. I smiled in a way I had not smiled in years. "We are going to need more trays," I said, "and probably a second mixer." She grinned like she already knew. I went back to measuring flour, my hands steady and sure. An hour later, as I was mixing dough for the next batch, my phone buzzed again. I wiped my hands and checked the screen. There it was, an email from Northwest Brew Company. The subject line, "Are you ready to scale up?" sat on my screen for a long moment before I opened it. That email marked the beginning of a different life, one I had dreamed about quietly for years, without admitting it to anyone. The contract that Northwest Brew Co. offered was more than I had imagined. Regular weekly orders, seasonal specialty items, and the possibility of expanding to multiple stores if sales stayed strong. I signed it with shaking hands, half convinced the universe would snatch it away if I blinked too hard. By early 2016, I moved out of the drafty kitchen on the east side and rented a small space of my own near Division Street. It had 2 ovens, clean counters, and a big front window that faced an alley full of recycling bins. It was not pretty, but it was mine. I painted the walls myself and bought used equipment from a restaurant that had recently closed. Zoe became my unofficial manager before either of us realized it. She organized our schedule, trained new helpers, and rearranged shelving like she had been waiting her whole life to bring order to a kitchen. I hired 2 part-time assistants, both young, both eager to work nights. For the first time, I did not feel like I was fighting the world alone. Orders were steady. Paychecks were enough to cover rent without panic. I could buy groceries without calculating every cent. I could replace a pair of worn shoes before they fell apart. I even allowed myself to dream a little. A storefront someday, a line out the door. A life built on something more than survival. But the truth is that success does not erase old wounds. It only changes their shape. I learned that slowly. One afternoon, between batches, Z watched me stare at the prep counter for too long and asked if I had ever talked to anyone about my past. The question surprised me. I had not told her much, only the broad strokes. A bad family situation, a misunderstanding that spiraled, a decision to start over. But she had a way of seeing things without prying. Later that month, I met with a therapist for the first time. I found her office in a small building tucked behind a dental clinic. Her name was Dr. Whitaker, a calm woman in her 50s who spoke in a steady voice that made everything feel less sharp. I only saw her once every few weeks, not enough to dig deep, but enough to breathe. The moments that stayed with me were not the ones where I talked about the big events. It was the quiet flashes of clarity, the realization that I had spent most of my childhood walking on emotional eggshells without knowing it. The understanding that being the one blamed for everything had taught me to expect very little from people. The soft surprise when she said that what I had lived through was not normal, even if it felt familiar. I left each session feeling like someone had quietly opened a window in a room I did not know was stuffy. Business continued growing. By late 2017, Northwest Brew Co. expanded to 8 stores, all carrying our treats. I added 2 more ovens and bought a used delivery van so I could stop renting. 1 every week. I even decorated the kitchen for the holidays that year, something I had never done before. The warmth of twinkle lights along the shelves made the late hours easier. The place smelled like spices and butter and hope. Then came the first real blow to the business. A corporate events company placed a large order for a tech conference in downtown Portland. The order was complicated, with multiple flavors and careful packaging. My team and I worked 3 nights straight and delivered everything on time, Or so I thought. 2 days later, I received a formal complaint from the company. They claimed I had shorted them by 10 trays, cost them money, and damaged their reputation. They demanded a refund higher than the value of the order and implied they would sue if I did not comply. My stomach dropped. 10 trays are missing. It made no sense. We counted everything twice. I called Zoe into my office. She went through the paperwork with her usual precision. Nothing was missing. Nothing was mislabeled. We had followed the contract exactly. Something was off. That was when I hired Riley Chen, a young attorney who had been recommended by another small business owner. Riley carried a confidence that made me feel like I had chosen the right person. She listened to everything without interrupting, asking for copies of every invoice, delivery slip, and message. Then she put together a response letter so detailed it made my head spin. She broke down the contract clause by clause and attached photographic proof of the delivery. She ended the letter with a polite but unmistakably sharp warning about false claims. Within a week, the company backed down. They withdrew their complaint and sent a lukewarm apology, pretending the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. I knew better. They had tried to bully a small business, and Riley had stopped them cold. I thanked her in person, and she shrugged it off. She said big companies counted on people being too scared to push back. She told me I had done the right thing by standing my ground. I should have felt invincible after that. Instead, something old and dark resurfaced. Trouble with family often returns the moment you let your guard down. One night at 2018, I opened my phone during a break and saw a message from a cousin I had not spoken to in years. It was a link to a video on social media. My heart tightened before I even tapped it. The thumbnail was my sister Sienna, sitting in her living room with a sorrowful expression on her face. She was 27 now, but her performance had only improved with age. In the video, she talked about being betrayed, about how her older sister had stolen from the family and then abandoned everyone. She said she had tried healing and forgiveness, but that some people refused to change. She never mentioned me by name, but she did not need to. It was clear who she meant. The comment section is filled with sympathy. Prayers. People praised her courage. Even relatives I barely remembered shared it with captions about heartbreak and resilience. I set my phone down and walked into the storage room. For a moment, I leaned against a shelf and let the quiet settle around me. The old pain did not knock me over like it once had. It just ached like a familiar bruise. It reminded me that my family had not changed. They still lived inside the story she crafted, and they still saw me as the villain. Months passed. Business kept me busy, and my life became more stable than I had ever imagined. But the next blow came in a way I did not expect. I learned that my grandmother had died. Not from my mom, not from my dad, not from any relative. A former neighbor in Salem who followed my bakery on social media sent me a message one afternoon. She wrote that she was sorry for my loss and hoped I was doing all right. I stared at the words until they blurred. My throat tightened and my eyes stung. My grandmother was gone. The woman who taught me to bake. The woman whose memory book still sat untouched in my closet. And no one in my family had told me. Not my mom, not my dad, not one cousin, not even Sienna, who had used her so freely in her stories. That silence was the final confirmation I did not need, but had always feared. I sat alone in the kitchen long after the staff went home. The hum of the refrigerators filled the room, but everything felt strangely hollow. I had managed to build a life that looked solid from the outside, but inside, something old and unresolved still tugged at me. When I finally stood up, I felt clearer than I had in a long time. I made a decision that settled deep into my bones. I whispered it out loud so it could not slip away. I am going to build something they can never touch. It was not revenge. It was not anger. It was the understanding that the only way to be free was to create a life so whole and so steady that none of their lies or silence could reach me again. The next morning, I opened the bakery early. Sunlight streamed across the prep tables the next morning, warm and steady. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally standing in my own life instead of running from the one I had left behind. The bakery hummed with the familiar rhythm of mixing bowls and oven doors. Doug rose beneath clean towels. My staff moved with practiced ease. Everything looked ordinary, but a shift had happened inside me. I could feel it in the way I breathed. Lighter, firmer, settled. That sense of clarity lasted through the next few years, even as life layered itself with new challenges. From 2021 to 2023, the bakery grew faster than I expected. Northwest Brew Co. expanded again, and my orders followed. I hired 2 more part-time helpers and put Zoe fully in charge of scheduling and inventory. She thrived in that role, walking through the kitchen with her clipboard tucked under her arm, giving directions with the calm confidence of someone who had found her own place in the world. But around that same time, the old ghosts came back in a form I had learned to recognize. Sienna had discovered a new stage for her stories: social media. She posted vague quotes about betrayal, about toxic siblings, about people who pretend to be innocent while destroying families. She never used my name, but there was no need. Her followers understood the performance, the mournful gaze, the trembling lower lip, the soft claims that she wished things could have been different. Each time one of those posts popped up through a mutual acquaintance or through a cousin who liked stirring drama, I quietly took a screenshot and saved it. I never wrote back. I never defended myself. I had learned long ago that responding only fed the fire. Silence was my shield now. Still, those posts had a way of finding me on the worst days. On nights when I stayed late finishing orders. On mornings when I thought I was finally free of her. They slipped into my life like small barbs. Annoying, persistent. Not enough to wound me the way they once had, but enough to remind me that she never let go of a narrative where she was the victim and I was the villain. The turning point came one afternoon in early 2022. I was boxing pastries when the front bell rang. Customers did not usually come during production hours, so I wiped my hands and walked to the door. When I saw who was standing there, I felt my breath catch. Dana, my cousin. The same cousin who had sent me the short apology text 12 years earlier, but had never spoken to me again. She looked older now, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired in a way that suggested life had not been easy. She held a paper cup of coffee like a lifeline, and when she saw me, her face softened with guilt. I recognized instantly. She asked if we could talk somewhere quiet. I brought her into the small office behind the kitchen. She sat down, clasping her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. For a moment she seemed unable to breathe, let alone speak. Then her eyes filled with tears. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. And I should have said it years ago. I waited. She looked down, gathered herself, and finally spoke the truth that had been buried since the night everything fell apart. Back in 2010, Sienna had been dating a man named Tommy Pierce, older than her, flashy, unreliable. She owed him money she did not want our parents to know about. He had been pushing her to pay him back quickly. Dana saw them arguing in the driveway a few days before Christmas. She heard him threaten to tell everyone she was irresponsible. She heard Sienna promise she would come up with the cash. When Grandma's envelope went missing, Dana had seen Sienna standing by the gift table earlier. She saw her slip something into her coat before walking to the bathroom. She wanted to say something. She knew it was wrong. But in that house, truth often bent toward whatever kept the peace, and peace meant protecting Sienna at all costs. Then Dana swallowed hard and told me the part that felt like a punch to the chest. "Sienna told me that if you got kicked out, it might actually make things easier for everyone," she whispered. I did not want to repeat that, but it has eaten at me for years. The words hit me with a strange mix of shock and inevitability. A piece of me had always known Sienna took the envelope, but hearing that she had been willing, even relieved, to see me pushed out felt different. It was betrayal in its purest form, not born of accident or heat of the moment, but intention. I leaned back in my chair and let that truth settle. My heart ached, but not in the way it once would have. It was quieter, steadier, like acknowledging something I had been tiptoeing around for years. Anna wiped her cheeks. "I am sorry, Harper. I should have told the truth that night. I was scared. Everyone always looked at Sienna like she was made of glass, and I did not want to be the one who cracked her. But it has haunted me all these years. I reached over and touched her hand. I know. Thank you for telling me now. It means more than you think. She exhaled with relief, nodded, and after a few more quiet moments, she left. I watched her walk down the alley and disappear around the corner. When the door closed behind her, I stood alone in the office and let the silence wash over me. I finally knew the truth. And somehow, instead of reopening a wound, it stitched something together. But Sienna was not finished performing. In late 2022, she began contacting small local news blogs, the kind that specialized in emotional personal stories and dramatic family breakdowns. I heard about it through a friend who worked in the media. She said a young woman with a trembling voice had been pitching a story about a sister who betrayed her at Christmas, stole from their grandmother, and abandoned the family. My friend had declined because something in the story felt off, but she warned me that another outlet might take it. That was the moment I understood what I had been feeling for months, a steady tightening in my chest, a sense that something was building. Sienna was molding her story into something bigger. She wanted sympathy, attention, validation, and she did not care who she hurt to get it. I could not control her, but I could be ready. One rainy morning in early 2023, I sat alone in the bakery office after everyone left. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the folder where I kept every screenshot, every message, every hint of the truth, each one a strand in the tangled web she had spun around me. I had never planned to use them. I had saved them out of instinct, but now they felt like necessary tools, not weapons, just truth waiting to be seen. As I looked through those files, my heart began to steady in a way it had not in years. There was no fear left, no confusion, no lingering hope that she might someday admit what she did. If the truth ever came to light, I needed to be prepared. I closed the laptop and locked the office door behind me. The kitchen was dim except for the glow of the exit sign and the soft hum of the refrigerators. I walked through the space slowly, touching the counters lightly, as if grounding myself. This bakery has become my life, my proof that I could build something from nothing, my shield against a world that once turned its back on me. And as I stood in the quiet, one clear thought rose inside me, firm and steady. If the truth comes back around, I need to be ready. I flipped off the last light and stepped out into the night, unaware of how soon that moment would arrive. I tapped the video feed and saw the shape standing just beyond the edge of the porch light. The sky was still a deep shade of early morning blue, the kind that presses against the windows before the sun wakes up. I felt something tighten in my chest. But to understand why that moment shook me in a way nothing else had in years, I need to explain what the months leading up to it had become. Before that morning, I had finally settled into a rhythm that felt almost foreign to me. Stability had never been part of my life until then. My bakery was thriving. Northwest Brew Co. had opened 6 new locations, each one asking for larger weekly deliveries than the last. My nights were not quiet, but they were dependable. My days were full of work that mattered, and my evenings were spent in a home that felt like a victory I had earned, inch by inch. The house on Mount Tabor became my anchor, a 1950s craftsman with a porch wide enough for 2 chairs, a living room filled with soft afternoon light, and a kitchen where I tested more recipes than I could count. Some nights I would sit on the hardwood floor and listen to the hum of the refrigerator and still marvel that the space was mine, completely mine, not borrowed, not temporary. Not something that could be taken because someone else changed their mind. But every good thing in my life seemed to cast a shadow of something, unfinished. Even in the quiet moments, I felt a flicker of awareness that the past was not done with me. It hovered like a faint echo, never loud enough to drown out my progress, but steady enough to remind me that unfinished stories have a way of finding their way back. It started subtly, a family member liking one of my bakery posts. An aunt left a comment under a photo of a cinnamon roll saying it reminded her of the ones I used to make for holiday gatherings. A cousin messaging Zoe for a cake order without contacting me directly. All harmless on the surface, but noticeable because for 13 years they had treated me like a ghost. Then came the day my cousin posted the photo of me at my new house. I could tell it was taken quickly, maybe even without thinking. I was smiling, holding the mug she had brought as a gift. The porch rail glowed behind me. It was a simple moment, but the second I saw it on Facebook, I felt my stomach knot. I knew exactly who would see it, and how fast. That night at the bakery, while Zoe organized the next morning's prep lists, I showed her the post. She stared at the screen, her mouth pulling into a thin line. Then she lifted her eyes to mine. People like your sister do not take well to other people doing better than them. She adjusted her glasses and tapped the phone lightly. If she wants something, she will come looking. That is how people like her survive, by finding places to latch onto. I exhaled slowly. I hated that Zoe was right, but she always had a way of seeing truth plainly. I felt something inside me shift again, something like armor settling into place. I did not want the past in my home, not in this sanctuary I had finally built. That night after work, I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the faded blue rim, and sat at the dining table with the folder I had kept hidden for years. It felt heavier now, as if the memories inside had gained weight with time. I pulled out each piece, the screenshots, the messages, Dana's confession written in her shaky handwriting, notes from meetings with Riley, the copy of the draft no trespass document that Riley had insisted I keep on standby. She had told me to prepare for the possibility that a line might be crossed someday, even if I did not believe it would happen. I remembered how she leaned back in her chair during our meeting, her tone calm but firm. Protect your space. Protect what you have built. People rarely change their behavior, even if you change yours. I filed everything neatly back into the folder and placed it inside the drawer of the small entryway table. The drawer slid shut with a soft click that echoed in the quiet room. I stood there for a long moment with my hand resting on the wood. That folder represented something I had never had before. Not revenge, not bitterness, preparedness, and a kind of power that did not rely on hurting anyone. Over the next several days, life fell back into its usual pace. Early mornings at the bakery, deliveries to Northwest Brew Company, long evenings testing new recipes. Customers stopped by to say they loved the pecan shortbread or the lemon bars. I would return home, tired but content, sit on the porch, sip tea, and watch the sky fade into twilight. I started planting small herbs along the walkway, rosemary and sage tucked into dark soil. I repainted the mailbox, small things that made the house feel like it was welcoming me, rather than just holding me. For the first time in more than a decade, I slept through the night without waking to the old panic that someone might blame me for something I had not done. Then, one Saturday afternoon, while I was pruning the rosemary, my phone buzzed. It was the cousin who had posted the photo. She had sent me a screenshot of a private message from Sienna. It said, "Tell me where Harper lives. I need to speak to her." Below the text was a second message after my cousin refused. "I will find out anyway. People always tell me things." My cousin wrote beneath her screenshot that I did not answer her. "Just wanted you to know." I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone down. My fingers trembled just slightly. Not from fear, from recognition. The shadow I had sensed for months was no longer a shadow. It was moving. That night, while cleaning the bakery, Z found me standing still near the ovens. She asked what was wrong. When I told her, she took a deep breath and nodded. "Then be ready and keep boundaries tight. People who build their lives on stories need new chapters, and you are the only one she has left to write about." Her words stayed with me the rest of the night. They followed me home. They sat with me in the quiet kitchen while I drank warm tea. Boundaries, the thing I had never been allowed to have growing up. The thing closed every curtain and told myself that even if she came, she would not be allowed inside. Not physically, not emotionally, not into the life I had created with so much effort. 2 weeks passed quietly, too quietly. Spring settled over the neighborhood. The air smelled like wet earth and cedar. I planted tulips along the walkway. I drove to the bakery before sunrise, headlights cutting through the dim morning. I worked, baked, cleaned, and laughed with my staff. But this morning, the camera alert appeared like any other. I had gone to bed after midnight, exhausted from a long week of large orders. I was in that foggy space between dreaming and waking when my phone buzzed on. The nightstand. Motion detected at your front porch. I frowned and reached for it. The house was still dark. The world outside was quiet. I tapped the notification. The camera feed opened slowly. At first, all I saw was a faint outline, a figure standing at the edge of the porch. Still. Waiting. The figure stepped slightly forward, enough for the porch light to catch the shape of the hair, the slope of the shoulders, the outline of a suitcase at their side. And in an instant, I knew exactly who it was. Sienna, standing at my home. At dawn. After 14 years of silence and lies and distance, after years of telling anyone who would listen that I had ruined her life, after spreading stories to every corner of our extended family, after everything, she was here. My breath went thin. The room felt too small. The air is still. I sat up slowly, careful not to make a sound even though she could not hear me. Something inside me softened and hardened at the same time, a strange blend of disbelief and inevitability. I kept watching the screen. Her posture was confident, entitled, as if she had simply decided that she belonged here. Beside her feet sat a rolling suitcase, the same kind people bring when they plan to stay. She shifted her weight and looked directly into the camera, her expression unreadable but unmistakably familiar. The look she wore before every performance. The look she used when she needed something from someone and expected them to give it to her. A slow, chilling understanding passed through me. She had not come to talk. She had come to move into my house, my sanctuary, my home, the one thing I had built completely outside her reach. I stared at the screen, unable to look away. Unable to move. The past had found its way to my porch, and the sun had not even risen yet. I kept staring at the camera feed, my breath tightening as the image sharpened. Sienna stood under the faint edge of the porch light, her suitcase beside her, her posture steady in a way that felt practiced, as if this moment had been rehearsed. The sky behind her was still a deep shade of dawn, the kind that makes everything appear colder than it really is. I sat motionless, letting the weight of what I saw settle inside me. Then she shifted slightly and turned her head. That was when I noticed something else. Another figure stepping into view. My mom, Marjorie, standing a few feet behind her, wrapped in a long coat, her arms crossed as if impatient with the weather, or impatient with the world in general. I felt my pulse deepen in my throat. For a moment, everything inside me went still, like a ripple on a lake freezing mid-motion. They were both here, on my porch, at dawn, with luggage. The meaning was not subtle. I rose from the bed slowly, every movement deliberate. I walked through the quiet house, each step steady on the hardwood. When I reached the entryway, I paused in front of the small table, opened the drawer, and placed my hand on the folder inside. The one I had prepared for years without knowing exactly when I would need it. The one that held every truth they had buried, and every lie they had built a story on. I took the folder with me as I unlocked the door. The morning air rushed in, sharp and cold, carrying the faint smell of pine from the trees. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. There was a moment where none of us spoke. The silence stretched out like a long shadow. Sienna finally broke it. She stepped forward, chin lifted, her expression calm in a way that felt unnerving, almost serene. She said she was moving in. The words came out smooth, confident, like the conclusion of a sentence she had been reciting repeatedly to herself. She did not ask. She announced, as if she had the right, as if the past 14 years were a misunderstanding I was responsible for cleaning up. I felt something shift inside me. Don't panic. Not confusion. A clarity that had taken years to build. I did not stumble or freeze. I simply adjusted my stance, letting myself take in the scene with a steadiness I had earned. My mom moved closer, rubbing her hands together as if trying to warm them. She avoided my eyes at first. Then she spoke with that tone she often used when she believed she was being patient. She said they were only here because the family needed to heal, and because I was in the best position to help Sienna right now. Help. That word carried the same shape it always had, a demand dressed as a request. I did not open the door wider. Instead, I lifted the folder and held it against my chest. Sienna gave me a small, irritated smile, the kind she used when she expected someone to fall in line. She said that after everything I owed the family, it was the least I could do. And then she reached for her suitcase, as if preparing to drag it past me. That was the moment I opened the folder. I did not speak loudly. I did not rush. I simply unfolded the pages one by one and held them where they could see. Old screenshots, chronological notes, messages she had sent to relatives twisting the truth, a written statement from Dana describing exactly what she had seen in 2010. The confirmation that the envelope had been taken by Sienna to repay a debt to Tommy Pierce. The note where Dana described hearing Sienna say that if I was kicked out, things would be easier for everyone. My mom blinked as she read the words. For a moment, her face softened with something like recognition, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and glanced at Sienna as if waiting for a cue. I reached into the folder again. This time, I pulled out the draft that Riley had helped me prepare, a no trespass notice, fully formatted, ready to file the moment I needed to. I held it up between us. Sienna's face changed. There was a flicker of uncertainty so briefly anyone else might have missed it. But I knew her well. I saw that shift. I watched her try to swallow it down and pull her expression back into one of confidence. She told me I was being dramatic. That family fight, that I needed to get over the past. She said that all she wanted was a place to stay while she figured things out, and that as her older sister, I should welcome her. It was almost impressive. The way she could pivot blame like adjusting a picture frame. My mom stepped in closer then. She said something about loyalty, about blood, about how they were trying to rebuild connections. She added that I seemed to be doing well financially, and that, a little, generosity would not hurt me. Generosity. They had not spoken to me for 14 years. They had cut me off, believed lies, spread lies, and now marched to my porch as if that history was supposed to dissolve under the weight of their expectation. I took a breath and let it out slowly. Then I told them both the truth. Not loudly, not harshly, just clearly. I said I did not owe anyone anything except myself. I said the house behind me was a place I had built from the ground up without a single moment of support from them. I said their lies had cost me a family, a sense of belonging, and years of peace. And I said I was no longer willing to open my life to people who had shown me, repeatedly, that they valued control more than truth. Sienna stepped forward again, her voice rising. She said something sharp about how I should be grateful she even came to me, that she was giving me a chance to do the right thing. I lifted my hand slightly, signaling her to stop. Then I said one more thing, a line that came from a place inside me I did not know had grown so strong. I said she no longer had any place in my story unless I allowed it. And I was choosing not to allow it. She blinked, thrown by the calm in my voice. That was the moment Officer Delgado walked up the driveway. I had called him earlier, minutes before opening the front door. I had not known what would unfold, but I knew enough about patterns in history to recognize when a situation might escalate. Delgado knew my home address from a previous community event. I explained to him that my estranged family members were showing signs of refusing to leave my property. He had told me he would wait nearby in case things got out of hand. He arrived quietly, hands resting calmly near his belt, his voice measured. He asked if everything was all right. He asked who lived at the residence. He asked if anyone here was refusing to leave. My mom stepped back immediately. She hated confrontation that drew attention. Sienna stiffened, her expression twisting with indignation. She said it was a private family matter. Delgado looked at me, just me, and asked what I wanted done. I straightened my shoulders. My voice did not shake when I answered. I said I wanted them removed from my property. In that moment, the last thread of the old dynamic snapped. Sienna opened her mouth to protest, but Delgado raised a hand gently and reminded them that homeowners have the right to deny entry to anyone. He added that if they refused to leave voluntarily, a formal notice could be filed. My mom whispered that she could not believe I was doing this. Her voice shook with disappointment. but not the kind that inspired guilt. It was the familiar disappointment of a person realizing they no longer hold power over someone they once controlled. I stepped closer to the doorway, blocking their view inside the house. I told them both to take their things and leave. I told them they no longer had permission to step foot on my property. And I told them that if they returned without notice, I would file the document in my hand, the no trespass draft. Delgado remained beside me, steady and silent. Siena's eyes flared with anger. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase hard enough to make her knuckles pale. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, fight, force her way out of sheer entitlement. But then she saw the folder again, the pages I had shown her. The evidence she had spent 14 years pretending did not exist. Something inside her faltered. Finally, she turned around, tugged the suitcase down the porch steps, and walked toward the street with quick, frustrated movement. My mom followed after her, glancing back only once. It was not a look that asked for reconciliation. It was a look of disbelief that the old script no longer worked. I stayed on the porch until they were gone. The morning air settled over me, cool and steady. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what had just happened. For the first time in my life, I had stood between myself and the people who once defined me, and I had not let them inside. When I finally stepped back through the doorway, I pressed my palm against the wood and let out a long breath. Closing the door behind me felt like reclaiming something I had lost more than a decade ago. My voice, and in the quiet that followed, the house seemed to breathe with me. The house stayed quiet long after the door closed, the kind of quiet that settles deep into the walls. I stood there with my hand still resting on the wood, feeling the faint echo of everything that had just happened. For the first time in years, I was not the one walking away. I was the one staying put, the one choosing my own ground, the one refusing to shrink. But peace, especially after confrontation, never lasts long. Within a few hours, the aftermath began. It always did with my family. It never came directly to me. It traveled sideways, through relatives, through social media, through people who wanted to believe the loudest voice instead of the truest. 1. That afternoon, while I was at the bakery prepping a large batch of lemon bars, my phone buzzed on the counter. Then again, and again. Notifications from cousins I had not spoken to in more than a decade. Screenshots, forwarded posts, comments from my mother and relatives who had not even bothered to ask what happened. My mother posted a long message that stretched across several paragraphs. She told the world she was heartbroken. She said her oldest daughter had turned her back on family during a moment of crisis. She said she had tried to rebuild the connection, but had been rejected at the doorstep by a daughter who had been poisoned by resentment. She said I had changed so much she barely recognized me, and that she prayed for the strength to forgive me someday. Not one sentence resembled the truth. I read the post twice, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to feel every emotion passing through me. Anger, disappointment, sadness. Then a strange calm. The words no longer cut the way they once did. They were familiar in the way an old wound is familiar. You know exactly where it aches, but it no longer controls you. I took screenshots of everything and forwarded them to Riley with a short message asking her to document the posts. Riley responded quickly, promising to archive everything in case things escalated. She reminded me that I had already done the hardest part. Setting boundaries is almost always met with backlash, she wrote, but that does not make the boundary wrong. I put my phone aside and went back to work. The smell of sugar and lemon filled the kitchen, grounding me in something real and predictable. I wiped the counter, checked oven timers, and sifted flour. Normal motions. Steady motions. They kept the noise at a distance. Later that night, when I finally got home, the porch light flicked on as I walked up the steps. I unlocked the door, set my bag down, and exhaled. The house felt warm, safe, whole. Nothing like the chaos my family was trying to stir outside its walls. I made tea and sat at the dining table, letting the quiet settle again. My mind drifted to the past, Not in a painful way, but in a reflective one. I had spent so many years wanting someone to acknowledge the truth. Maybe now I would no longer need that. Maybe the truth just needed space and time to surface on its own. I did not expect the phone call that came the next afternoon. I had just finished loading a tray of pastries into the display case at Northwest Brew Company when my phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar, and for a second I considered letting it ring. Something in my stomach told me to answer. The voice on the other end hesitated before saying his name. Tommy Pierce. My breath caught slightly. I had not heard that name in more than a decade. Last I knew, he had moved out of state after leaving a trail of messes behind. He sounded different now. Older. Tired. Sober, maybe? He asked if we could talk. He said it was important. He said it was about what happened in 2010. My pulse tightened. I asked him what he wanted. He said he wanted to tell the truth. We agreed to meet in a public place, a small coffee shop near Laurelhurst Park. It was early evening when I walked inside. The air smelled of roasted beans and pine needles from the wreaths hanging on the wall. Tom sat at a corner table, hands clasped, shoulders hunched slightly. He looked older than I remembered, with lines around his eyes that made him seem worn down by time rather than hardened by it. When he saw me, he stood up awkwardly and nodded before sitting again. He apologized first, not the shallow kind of apology that tries to smooth over guilt, but the kind that carries weight behind it. He said he had thought about that night for years. He said he had been young, reckless, and broke back then, and that he had dragged Sienna into his bad decisions. But what he said next made the air shift around us. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small stack of printed messages, old ones. He said he had saved them during a time when he thought he might need proof that he was not always the one to blame. He slid the papers toward me. I hesitated before pulling them closer. They were text messages from Sienna, dated December 24th, 2010. Lines of panicked words between her and Tommy. She told him she did not have the money she owed and that she would find it, somehow. She wrote that she would figure out how to get the envelope from the table at Grandma's house. Then another message, the moment that felt like a cold hand gripping my spine. She wrote that if the envelope went missing, she would make sure the blame landed on me, because Mom would always believe her. That exact phrase, Mom will believe anything I say. Let Harper take the fall. I stared at the lines until they blurred slightly. Tommy spoke quietly. He said he had kept the messages out of fear and selfishness at first. But when he saw the Facebook posts from my family in recent years and how he realized he had contributed to a lie that had destroyed my life, he said he was tired of carrying it, that he wanted to set the record straight, even if it changed nothing for him. I listened, my hands gripping the papers, feeling heat building in my chest. Not rage, not grief. Something deeper, something like validation mixed with mourning. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to see it in writing. Proof carved into the past like a scar. I asked him why he came here. He said he had seen the recent post from my mother, the one accusing me of turning my back on my family. He said that when he read it, something inside him snapped. He said he could not let the lie keep living without trying to correct it. When the meeting ended, he wished me well and walked out quietly. I sat there for several minutes, staring at the messages, letting the weight of them sink into my bones. 14 years of lies pressed into a handful of printed lines. When I finally left the coffee shop, dusk had settled over the park. The trees created long silhouettes against the fading light. I walked slowly to my car, breathing in the cool air. Every step felt heavier and steadier at the same time. At home, I laid the new papers on my dining table beside the folder. I could feel the truth gathering its own momentum. The lies my sister had built were beginning to crack, not because I chased justice, but because truth has a way of finding its own light. I opened the folder, flipping through the pages that held 14 years of silence and resilience. The messages from Tommy fit perfectly into the timeline. They were not dramatic, they were not emotional. They were simply evidence. And evidence is powerful. I sat down for a long time, staring at everything I had collected. The screenshots, the statements, the no trespass draft, the messages from 2010. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me again, a readiness, a resolve that came from knowing I no longer had to carry speculation. I had proof, I had clarity, and I had a choice. I closed the folder slowly. The house was quiet, but this time, the quiet was not the kind that followed loss. It was the quiet that comes before action, the kind that gathers strength, the kind that hints at the moment when the truth finally steps forward. It was time. I closed the folder slowly, feeling the weight of 14 years settle into something sharper and clearer than it had ever been. The house was quiet, but inside me there was a hum, a steady current that felt like resolve. I knew what needed to be done. Not for revenge, not for closure from anyone else, but because I was finally ready to let the truth stand without fear of how it would land. I went into the kitchen, made a cup of coffee, and sat at the table with my laptop. The glow from the screen lit the edges of the papers spread in front of me. Screenshots, statements, dates, messages from 2010, the no trespass draft, everything lined up like a map showing the exact shape of my past. I opened a blank email. The cursor blinked at me, waiting. For a long moment, I stared at the empty space. Then, I began to write. I kept my voice steady, clear, unemotional. No accusations, no dramatic language, just facts. I laid out exactly what happened 14 years earlier. The envelope, the lie, the fallout, the years of silence, the online attacks, the messages from Tommy, Dana's statement, my mother's refusal to hear anything outside the version that soothed her. I wrote that I was not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I wrote that I was not trying to shame anyone. I wrote that the truth had a right to exist, even if it came late. I attached the folder. Then I went through my contact list and selected the names. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. People who had watched the lie ripple outward for more than a decade. People who had whispered or speculated or distanced themselves. People who had believed Sienna without question. I hit send. The moment the whoosh of the email left my laptop, something inside me loosened. Not relief, not victory, but a quiet kind of freedom. I had always carried the truth alone. Now it was out in the world, where it belonged. I closed the laptop and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and smelled faintly of the cedar trees along the side yard. I breathed in slowly and let the feelings settle in my chest. The responses began within an hour. At first they came in clusters. A few relatives wrote back with short messages. They said they were shocked. They said they never knew. They said they believed me and were sorry they did not reach out sooner. Some said they remembered small moments that suddenly made sense. Then came silence from others. Long, telling silence. Aunts who had always adored Sienna left the email unread. Cousins who had publicly supported her online said nothing. The silence did not sting. It only confirmed what I had learned long ago. People believe what makes them comfortable, not what makes them accountable. By evening, messages trickled in with more substance. One of my uncles apologized for cutting me out of family events. He said he wished he had asked questions. Another relative said she had always wondered why the story around the envelope kept changing. She wrote that the way it was handled had never sat right with her. Then there were the ones who admitted they had known Sienna had a history of lying, but did not want to get involved. Those messages did not anger me. They simply clarified the landscape of my old family dynamic. Late that night, my phone rang. The screen showed my dad's name. I froze. For 14 years, we had not exchanged a single word. Not a voicemail, not a birthday message, nothing. He had vanished the moment my mother decided her version of the story was the truth. He had watched from the sidelines, silent and complicit. I let the phone ring twice before answering. When I said hello, there was a pause. Then he breathed out my name the way someone says a word they are not sure. They have the right to speak. He said he got my email. His voice was thinner than I remembered, slightly raspy, as if age and regret had carved themselves into his lungs. He said he spent the afternoon reading through everything. He said he felt ashamed. I did not respond. I waited. He said he had always suspected Sienna was lying that night. He said there were things he noticed that did not add up. Her story changed. Her behavior changed. But he said he did not speak up because my mother was already fragile, and she would not have tolerated anyone questioning Sienna. He said he was sorry. The words hung in the air. I asked him why he did not reach out all these years. Why did he watch me disappear from the family without lifting a hand? He said he was afraid of the conflict it would cause. He said he was afraid of upsetting my mother. He said he was afraid of choosing the wrong daughter. I felt something settle inside me. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was recognition. The same pattern that had followed me since childhood. Silence used as an escape route. Avoidance dressed as keeping the peace. I told him the truth. I told him that silence can wound deeper than lies, and that families do not fall apart because of the truth. They fall apart because of the people who choose comfort over honesty. He did not argue. He only said he hoped someday I would let him see the house I built. I did not promise him anything. I only said that time would tell. We ended the call quietly. Word spread quickly through the family after that, not because I pushed it, but because people had finally seen the receipts. The proof. The messages showed that the blame had been intentionally placed on me. The email Dana had written confirming what she saw. The online attacks. The years of manipulation. Within a few days, something surprising happened. Sienna got blocked from several family group chats. Not officially, not with a dramatic announcement, but slowly, quietly, people removed her or muted her. They stopped engaging with her posts. Some relatives messaged me privately to say they confronted her. She denied everything, then lashed out. The conversations ended badly. One cousin told me Sienna lost her part-time job at a small retail store because the manager found her online videos ranting about being victimized by her family. Customers had complained. The store wanted no part in personal drama spilling into their brand. She tried to post new videos defending herself. They gained no traction, no supportive comments, no sympathy, just silence and fatigue. For the first time, the lie she had built began collapsing under its own weight. One evening, after finishing a long shift, I came home and set the new stack of printed messages from Tommy inside the folder. The evidence now filled nearly every page. 14 years of truth, finally gathered in one place. I sat at the dining table and traced the edges of the folder with my fingers. Not to revisit the past, but to acknowledge it. This was the history I had survived. The proof of who they really were. The proof of who I had become in the aftermath. Then I opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I began writing the words I planned to say to Sienna the next time she tried to confront me. Not an apology, not an attempt at reconciliation. A boundary, a full sentence, a clear ending, a line drawn firmly between her past power and my present peace. I wrote slowly, deliberately, letting the words arrange themselves in a way that felt final. I wrote until my hand cramped slightly. When I finished, I closed the notebook and placed it beside the folder. The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet did not feel like an aftermath. It felt like preparation, because the truth was out now. And whatever came next, I would no longer be caught unprepared. I read over the sentence I had written in the notebook, the one meant for Sienna, and closed the cover quietly. There was no tremor in my hands, no heaviness in my chest, only a steady calm that felt like the final step of a long road. I knew our last conversation was coming. Not for reconciliation, not for reopening anything. It was simply time to end the story in my own voice. The moment came 2 weeks later. Sienna reached out through a short email. No apologies, no explanations, just a request to meet. She wrote that she wanted to speak in person and that she needed to tell me her side. I read the message twice and felt nothing stir inside me. No anger, no hope. No fear, just an understanding that this was the moment I had been preparing for. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe in Southeast Portland, the kind of quiet place where people mostly mind their own business. I told Riley where I would be. Without asking for details, she said she would sit a few tables away, only to make sure nothing escalated, she said. I thanked her. I did not need protection, but it felt good to know someone had my back. When I walked into the cafe the next morning, the smell of pastries and dark roast coffee wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I saw Sienna seated by the window. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes restless, her foot tapping against the leg of her chair. She looked smaller somehow, older in a way that had nothing to do with age. I moved toward the table. As I passed the row of booths, I spotted Riley sitting with a newspaper, pretending to read while keeping an eye on us. I nodded slightly. Then I sat across from my sister. She looked at me, searching my face for something. Weakness, maybe, or nostalgia. But she found neither. She started speaking before I even settled in my seat. Her voice trembled slightly, and she kept twisting the ring on her finger. She said she was sorry, but the words came out in a way that felt rehearsed, like she was checking off a box she knew she had to address. Then she shifted quickly into excuses. She said she had been young, stressed, overwhelmed. She said no one understood the pressure she faced. She said she did not know how to tell Mom the truth back then. She said everyone expected her to be perfect. She never said she lied. She never said she stole. She never said she used me as a shield to protect herself. Her sentences circled around the heart of the matter without ever touching it. Each explanation was a loop designed to avoid accountability. I listened quietly. At one point, her voice cracked and she wiped at her eyes. She whispered that she felt attacked by the family now, that people blamed her unfairly, that she had lost her job because of everything, that she felt isolated. I folded my hands on the table. I did not try to comfort her. When she paused, waiting for me to fill the silence the way I once did, I finally spoke. I told her I accepted her words, but not her narrative. I told her that apology without ownership is not restoration. It is manipulation. I told her I had carried the consequences of her choices for 14 years, and I had done so alone. I told her the truth did not ruin her life. Her choices did. She opened her mouth to argue, but I continued speaking, gently but firmly. I told her I no longer hated her. I no longer needed anything from her, but I no longer had room in my life for the version of her that refused to choose honesty. Then I reached into my bag and took out the document Riley had finished preparing. A no-contact agreement. I set it in front of her. Her eyes widened. She whispered that she thought we were here to fix things. She said this was cruel. She said I was throwing away the chance to rebuild a relationship. I told her I was not throwing anything away. I was protecting what I built, and I told her she had forfeited any claim to my life the night she let me walk out into the snow with no family and no truth to defend myself. Then I signed my name. She stared at the paper as if it were a door closing in her face. Maybe it was. She put a hand to her mouth and choked back a sound that was half sob, half frustration. She asked what she was supposed to do now. I looked at her calmly. I told her she would have to live her life the same way I did, one day at a time, one truth at a time, without me as the person she used to balance her mistakes. She cried quietly for a minute, then gathered her things. She stood up slowly, shoulders shaking, and walked out of the cafe. She did not look back. For the first time, she had to carry the weight of her own choices. Riley approached the table a moment later. She did not ask how it went. She only put a hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. I nodded to her, feeling a soft ache in my chest. Not pain. Release. Life began to settle into a new rhythm after that. A week later, I hosted a small dinner at my home on Mount Tabor. Nothing elaborate. Just a few dishes, good wine, candlelight, and the people who had become my real family through the years. Zoe arrived with homemade bread. Becca came with a small bouquet from her garden. Even Riley joined us, wearing a rare smile that made her look younger. We ate around the table I once sat at alone, the room filled with laughter and stories, and the soft kind of noise that wraps itself around you gently. Becca gave me a long hug when she arrived. She said I had survived more than most people ever would, and that now I was. Finally living, not just surviving. Her words touched something deep inside me. I realized she was right. After everyone left, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea. The evening air carried the scent of pine and cool soil. The lights of the city shimmered below the hill, small and steady, like distant reminders of everything I had endured to reach this moment. I looked out over the rooftops and felt the slow, warm truth settle inside me. I had not won by hurting anyone. I had not claimed victory by exposing every lie. My revenge was quieter, gentler, and somehow stronger. I had reclaimed my life. I had built a home no one could take from me. I had drawn a boundary that protected everything I had fought for, and I had learned that freedom sometimes comes not from confrontation, but from choosing peace for yourself, even when others stay tangled in chaos. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, watching the city lights flicker like tiny stars. I did not need them to fix the past. I did not need them to understand me. I did not need anything from the people who once defined my worth. I had become whole on my own. I whispered to the quiet neighborhood around me. I did not get revenge by making them hurt. I got revenge by building a life they could never break again. If you have ever been told that you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.